All right, Idaho's new abortion law is now in effect. It began at midnight this morning. The law is one of the most restrictive in the country. Outlaws all abortions in Idaho except, well, 3 exceptions. Case of rape, incest, reported to law enforcement, both those cases, and where the mother's death is imminent. The Dobbs decision changed that, though. The U.S. Supreme Court earlier this year changed the abortion status for the first time in nearly 50 years, giving the rights back to the states to decide what they want to do when it comes to abortion. Back in 2020, Idaho created a law just for this moment, a trigger law. A federal judge ruled last night, though, Idaho's law partially interferes with the federal law, known as EMTALA, which says medical providers that accept Medicare funding must provide care for patients in an emergency situation to stabilize them. Well, EMTALA includes abortion care if a doctor believes that is necessary to treat a woman experiencing medical issues, a pregnant woman. So what do Idaho Republican and Democratic leadership think of this ruling and the possibility about altering this law? Here's Chief Political Reporter Joe Paris.
Less than 24 hours after a federal judge partially paused a section of Idaho's new abortion law, legislative leaders are diving deep into the implications of the new trigger law. Republican leaders say they disagree with Judge Lynn Windmill's decision.
We're disappointed. We were hoping that the judge would go another direction, but it is what it is, and we're now in the process of discussing with the attorneys what we need to do and what our options are going forward.
House Majority Caucus leader, Republican Representative Megan Blanksma, was a sponsor of the 2020 abortion legislation that is now law. Idaho Republicans have spoken out on the federal court decision, saying, for now, Idaho must yield to the federal EMTALA provision, allowing abortion care in emergency situations at a different threshold than state law allows.
I think that it was a clever way for the Biden administration to get around a Supreme Court decision. I think that's what it is. And I think that what we learned from the Supreme Court is that they believe that the states have the right to regulate abortion. And so I'm disappointed in the decision because I don't think that it falls within what the Supreme Court has determined. But again, our lawyers are looking at what paths we have going forward, and so actually we're going to meet on that today, and hopefully we can have a better understanding.
We thought it was important to speak up in light of the important ruling yesterday.
Idaho Democrats gathered at the Capitol in Boise to speak out on the new law Thursday. They were critical of comments made by Republicans, saying they will continue to battle the federal court to partially limit the abortion law.
It was stunning. When you look at how narrow that ruling was, the ruling really just says that doctors will be permitted to provide emergency abortions where it's necessary to save the woman from catastrophic health consequences. So we are only talking about situations here where a woman is facing a life-threatening infection, loss of a body organ, paralysis, serious, major health consequences.
Democrats had hoped for a pause on the new law in general. A partial injunction is valued by Dems, but it is not the result they were hoping for.
The law that these folks passed says that the doctor can only perform abortion where death is certain. So if there's a 50-50 chance of the woman's death, that doesn't get the doctor off the hook. The doctor could face 5 years in prison for saving a woman who only has a 50% chance of death. We are fortunate that this federal judge stepped in to save us from the application of that law, and it was stunning that Republican leadership said they're going to fight that ruling to the end.
Republicans at the State House believe that the Idaho law leaves room for medical providers to make correct medical decisions, regardless of what EMTALA says. Blanksma says the Idaho law considers medical emergencies.
And that's why that's in there. It's not as if we didn't consider the health of the mother when we wrote the legislation, and that's why it's written in there. So this false narrative that the Democrats and the Department of Justice and the administration keep pushing, that this is some sort of total abortion ban, is completely false. That is a false narrative.
Why are they appealing it then? If this is what if they say it's implied that there's some exception for women's health, then why are they so outraged that the judge is trying to make that clear? That's all this judge's ruling does, is make clear that yes, you can treat a woman where there's a health emergency. Republican leadership is saying unacceptable. We want to overturn this ruling and make clear that there is no exception for the health of the mother.
Did you think about coming up with any legislation to, amend the abortion legislation, or do you like the way it is still?
Well, I think that's all what we're looking at as far as what we do going forward. And I hate to get out ahead of anybody and talk about how we would amend something before we understand what paths we have available to us via our attorneys.
We're going to fight this for all we're worth. We are going to hope that somebody listens to our call today to stop litigating this. Failing that, we certainly hope that voters will pay attention to this in November. And it's not just women. There are a lot of men who have women in their lives who hopefully don't want to see them, dead or suffering grievous health consequences. We are in a completely unacceptable situation right now, and our laws need to change, our lawmakers need to change.
You either trust the process or you don't. We disagree with the decision, but right now we're looking at what we need to do as far as process.
So where do we go from here? Is this the end of the road? Not quite. You may remember that the Idaho Supreme Court is also studying some Idaho abortion laws. Later in September, the Supreme Court in Idaho is going to take up some cases. We'll see where that goes. You also need to remember that the federal court, they gave a preliminary injunction on only a piece of the law. Now, the word preliminary is big here because that does mean that this will come back to a federal courtroom, and we'll find out at that point if that preliminary injunction will become permanent or something else could happen. Brian, the bottom line at the end of the day, though, here in Idaho is that there is the new abortion laws on the books. That trigger law is on the books right now. So for the most part, abortions are outlawed in the state of Idaho.
Civilly and criminally.
Correct. But there are those exceptions in Idaho law, regardless of EMTALA, regardless of what was going on in federal court. There is the consideration to save the life of the mother, and there's cases of rape and incest that are reported to law enforcement. So that is the law of the land right now. We'll see if that changes at all in court.
When you say in court and the preliminary injunction, this does give us an indication of which way this judge may be leaning, though, for possibly making this a permanent injunction on just that part of the law.
And so that would be probably the expected outcome, is that the preliminary injunction becomes permanent. Another thing is that a lot of states were looking at Idaho to see what happened here. The decisions in Idaho could impact other places across the country, so it'll be interesting to see how Idaho's decision really impacts the rest of the country.
All right. Thank you very much, Joe.